I think we need to have a discussion about autonomy. Um, what's the spectrum that you operate on when you're operating within a context of autonomy, right? Because obviously autonomy is not about becoming isolated, right? So what does autonomy, so to me, when we're thinking about these ideas of constructing a society that does not rely on the state, we're talking about a society that's autonomous, right?
Right.
So then becomes a question of, okay, well, how do we get there? And how do we get from where we are to where we're going? What are the investments and sacrifices that we're willing to make along that spectrum?
You know, it's the primary work the SpiritHouse is doing. We kind of made that commitment. Maya and I have been talking about that. Like, we made that commitment to do that, like, for these past 10 years. And I would say that we don't have a geographic, like, neighborhood, like you were saying, that declares itself a harm-free zone. Yeah. But I mean, that have been able to sustain it. But what we have done is that the work that we've done to move the values, like, we can see the benefits of that here. Right. And I know that what we have done in Durham, that there are more people who speak about the harm-free zone, and that, more importantly, that those values are taking root here and have impacted, like, who's our local government now.
So, like, on the spectrum, what are the nature of these relationships, and then what is the economic investment, what is the labor investment, and what is the time investment in terms of, and actually what is the ideological investment? Like, what are people doing this for? Mm-hmm. So what are the terms that you can construct for the movement so that it is able to push the state to move in a different direction? Because that's why I would assume you're having these conversations, because you need to move the state. Yeah. So the question of the autonomous spectrum, where on this spectrum am I able to have the most power that moves the state?
This is where I do think that the idea of, like, local does matter. There's two things. One, there is the goal or the idea of reducing the presence of any of these state entities in neighborhoods, right? So it's still the both and. It's how are we building accountability, measures in these places where we don't call the police at all. But then it's also who is running these institutions, who understand what the reality is of what we're driving, whether they agree with it or not, and that they understand that there is power. Because locally, we could get 200 people in Durham and it would shift an election easily. And that's not a difficult thing to do. So even if there's only 5 of us at the conversation representing the harm-free zone movement, they know that we have the ability at this point, the power to shift an election. And that's what we built in these 10 years.
Where in that 10, 20, 40 years do you see the intervention of reducing it, or reducing the present, right? What in that timeline, as you're moving along a spectrum of autonomy, has moved the state further away and built the power of the autonomous body, and built the power of the autonomous body? Because people who are elected can be easily moved in and out of elections, mm-hmm. right? That doesn't matter, right? So with a big picture, long game, right? 50 years from now, where does the work actually, what do you see sprouting out of the work, and what's that path for autonomy that got you there? If they're in there doing that level of work, are they organizing? Who's the next one that's coming after them to make sure that that work still goes?
Right.
Like, are they organizing on their end, or are you only working with the people who are in position as the state pops them in? And when I say state, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about ideology. Or are you organizing the DA to organize future DAs?
Yep.
In your 50-year plan to be non-harmful to Black folks? Where is it that you want to put the bulk of your time, money, hopes, and resources? Like, how are you spreading that out?
Mm-hmm.
Is the investment 50-50? I'm going to put 50% of my time and resources into getting these people off my back, and 50% into raising up our communities?
Right.
Or is it more 30-70? You know what I mean? Like, there's that, I think, is how you answer that question. So what we're laying out can maybe ease us through the next generation or 2 generations. But by the time we hit 7 generations, what have we seeded?
Right.
And so, I mean, I think that's kind of like, to me, I think that's the responsibility of a movement.